Have you heard of the trauma after the trauma? My name's Dr. Scott Giacomucci, and I'm a trauma therapist and educator. And today, I wanted to talk a little bit about this phenomenon I've been noticing in my work as a trauma therapist and consultant, that there seems to often be a trauma that takes place after the trauma. And what I mean by this is that many people that I'm working with are experiencing something traumatic, something adverse, something overwhelming and difficult. And there's the first trauma. And then in the immediate aftermath of that, they seek help or support or validation. They cry out, they reach out desperately for somebody to believe them or to care about them or to support them. And the other person isn't able to do that. And in that abandonment, there's another wound that emerges. There's a second trauma that's experienced. This is what I mean by the trauma after the trauma. So when we experience something traumatic or overwhelming, it's only normal and natural that we would seek support, that we would cry out or reach out for others to try to support us through that time. We really need human connection, and as humans, we really regulate our emotions through relationships and with other human beings. I mean, you think about this: when a child experiences something scary or overwhelming, their first instinct is going to be to reach out for their caregivers, for that support and that stability that they experience through that relationship. Now, not every human being has a relationship like that they can reach out to, especially in adulthood, which leads to additional experiences of abandonment or neglect. We're just feeling alone in our suffering, in our trauma, in our misery. Some trauma experts are suggesting that the primary thing that can prevent trauma from turning into PTSD or traumatic stress is the presence of one supportive adult in the aftermath of that trauma. So this is particularly important. It means that one of the most important preventative factors to long-term impacts of trauma is that we have one person that we can reach out to, one person that we feel safe with and connected to, someone that we can turn to who has our back after trauma. Now, in an ideal world, everybody would have more than one person that they could turn to. And we know it's just not true that everybody has that person. And so this is what I mean when I talk about the trauma after the trauma, that many folks experience trauma, and then in their aloneness or in their attempts to reach out to others and the other person fails to show up for them, there's another wound, an abandonment, another trauma that occurs. One example of this from my work is a client who experienced bullying as a child in school, really severe bullying. And then they go home and tell their parent about it. And their parent, instead of validating them and being open and curious, the parent tells them to get over it and tells them that they need to grow up and have tougher skin, instead of validating that what they're going through, what they're experiencing is difficult and overwhelming. Another example of this trauma after the trauma is that when somebody experiences sexual abuse or sexual trauma, and they go and tell a loved one, and that loved one doesn't believe them, thinks that they're making it up or they're exaggerating it, or tells them that it was their fault. This would be another example of the trauma after the trauma. And I think this also applies and relates to vicarious trauma. I'm thinking about myself, my colleagues, and just our profession as healthcare workers and therapists, that we're frequently experiencing vicarious trauma. And when we're told to just get over it, or we shouldn't be emotionally impacted when a client dies or a client commits suicide, that this could be another example of the trauma after the trauma, that healthcare workers are human beings too, and we experience vicarious trauma, and we have feelings when our clients die or when our clients are really struggling, and we also need our own support in the aftermath of that too. So these are a couple different examples of the trauma after the trauma. When somebody experiences something adverse and in the struggle, in the pain and suffering, they reach out for help, and the person they reach out to isn't able to show up for them, or they simply don't have anybody that they can reach out to. So if you wanted to learn more about different aspects of trauma and trauma healing, I'd encourage you to check out other videos on this channel. And so one thing that you can do to build resilience in your life and try to prevent the possibility of you experiencing trauma after a trauma in the way that I'm talking about it today is to cultivate those meaningful and supportive relationships before experiencing something adverse, before experiencing something overwhelming or traumatic. At some point in our lives, we're all going to experience something overwhelming, perhaps traumatic. And a simple thing that we can do is spend the time, the energy to really thoughtfully build supportive relationships in our life today, so that if or when we are in a situation when we really do need someone to have our back, someone that can show up for us emotionally, someone that we feel safe with, we have that relationship to turn to. So if you found this video helpful or interesting, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel here and leave a comment below. Let us know if you have any questions or any specific topics you'd love to see for future videos. We'd love to hear from you. And we hope that we can support you in your journey of healing from trauma or helping other people heal from trauma.